Hello and welcome to the Big Book Book Club. The last 2 months, well, in June and July, we were reading Johnathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susannah Clarke, although I think that both Milena and I read it in August, so or the majority of it in August. But we have both finished it and we are ready to talk to you about it. If you are new here, the Big Book Book Club is book club where we read books over 500 pages. This one was over 1,000 pages. So one of the bigger books that we have read, although not as big as the book I read last time with Milena, which was War and Peace.
Please don't mention that book.
And if you don't know, this is Milena from Milena Reads. Would you like to introduce yourself? And I think we talked about your favourite big books last time, but let me know any big books you've read in the last year that you've really enjoyed.
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, hi, I'm Milena from the channel Milena Reads. I read literary fiction, historical fiction, classics, and I loved Piranesi by Susannah Clarke, which is the only other book I think Susannah Clarke wrote. And no, I haven't read any other big books. You're the only one who makes me read big books. And War and Peace was the last big book I read, and that did not go super well. So yeah, I definitely like this better than War and Peace. But no, I mean, still the same big favorites. Middlemarch. Is Middlemarch my only big book? I mean, I liked Anna Karenina.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe only some fantasy books that are really big that I love, but I am not necessarily a big book champion. So you're helping me getting out of my comfort zone.
Oh, that's good. And okay, do you want to introduce Johnathan Strange and Mr. Norrell? Because I'm still trying to put this on Instagram. So.
Oh yes, of course, go ahead. Okay, so Johnathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is a book set during the Napoleon Wars in England, and it is about a group of York magicians, and it's about Johnathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and it very much feels like a classic from its time, but it is about a world where there is magic, and magic is viewed like academics, I guess, like a different branch of academics, and then you have theoretical magic and practical magic, and the core question of this book is why isn't there magic anymore in England? And we go on for 1,006 pages about that question.
Indeed, we do. So I don't usually read a whole lot of fantasy. I think this is one of 2 fantasy books that I've read this year. But as you said, it feels more like a classic or like historical fiction, even though there is magic in it. I feel like magic's not the huge, like, magic's like the theme, but it's not like what's actually happening a lot of the time. It's not explained. We don't see a lot of magic happening. There is a fairy who is there a lot of the time, but he seems more like a normal man of the Regency era. Like, he doesn't seem that.
Definitely.
He doesn't have wings or anything. So it's interesting to think about like the genre of this book, I think, because the fact that there is magic means that automatically it's fantasy, right? But the way that it feels, as I said, it doesn't feel like that. Both of us read a fair amount of classics and some historical fiction as well. So I'd say I'm definitely more familiar with those genres. And I think Susannah Clarke has made a book that feels like those because she's so like, she's writing it like a Regency novel in a lot of ways, or like a Victorian novel set in the Regency period, because I think the book reminds me.
I think that's a better description, the second one.
Yeah. What it reminds me the most of is Vanity Fair. Have you read Vanity Fair?
I have not.
Okay, so because that's about it's about a woman who's like cast out of society, and throughout the course of the novel, kind of Anna Karenina style, but it's more about like London as Vanity Fair, or this place where everyone's like about appearances and like a satire of the Regency era, but it was published in 1848, so it's like looking back at that time period. And I think a lot of the characters in this, there's a big cast of characters, which I think you kind of need to sustain 1,000 pages. You need a lot of people, and they remind me of that. I think there's a lot of humor in this book and a lot of satire. What was your thoughts on the characters and the like?
What are we doing spoiler-wise? Is this whole thing filled with spoilers, or do you have a timestamp?
Fully spoiled.
Fully spoilery. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. I actually had quite a difficult time with the characters. To me, this felt very Dickensian, and I think the reading experience to me felt quite similar to our mutual friend, which is his last book, which I found a good book. But I always have such a hard time visualizing Dickens's books, and especially his characters. They all sometimes blend together for me a bit, and I definitely had that with this book, where I found the characters so similar. I know that they're like have different characteristics, but they were all like white men of a certain age, of a certain class, and I had such a hard time. It took me, I think, about 300 pages before I knew, oh, that's not the same person. Okay, he is different. He is different. And and then I watched the trailer and some clips of the film. Oh, hi, Mary. I'm sorry.
Mary says she's here free thoughts, so maybe we'll try and not spoilery to begin with.
I mean, no, I don't. No, I'm not getting into spoilers, but I had a hard time distinguishing them. And when I watched some of the footage of the series, I could put a face to everyone. And I definitely think that with Dickens and with these kind of books, it works better for me on screen because I'm such a visual reader, and I don't think I find Susannah Clarke. I found in Piranesi, but not in this one. Not a very visual writer. And with the fantasy element as well, I wanted to see the magic, like the practical magic, and that didn't happen until like later in the book. And so to me, it was difficult. Like this book, I found it difficult.
Okay.
At least the first half.
I think I didn't find it difficult. I found it quite easy to slip into. But I don't know if that's because I don't read a huge amount of fantasy, so I don't really care about magic. Like I don't really care about magical systems or anything, or like how things are done. And I never want to read a book that's explaining to me. I find it really boring when books are explaining things to me. I just want to be like plopped into the middle of it and expected to either like work it out or let it just wash over me and not care.
Yeah.
I don't really understand. Like I'm more about the vibes than about the literal things happening on the page.
I mean, then this book works for that. But there's like one example, and this may be a bit spoilery, so maybe Mary like leave. But there's a scene on YouTube about the series about the sand horses, and it's described how it's done in this book. Like you get the visuals of those horses and what it looks like and the effect that it has, but we never know how he makes the horses happen. And in this scene, what he does is he put his hands in the sand and he turns his hands like this, and then the horses appear. And I was like, yes, I needed that in the book. I needed the book to say he put his hands in the sand, turned them, and like screwed his face on. I was like, I needed that, and I know that is me. Like that's the kind of reader I am, but that is where I struggled with this book. Okay. And it was later, I think we got a little bit more of that. But yeah, I think that's the fantasy reader in me then.
Yeah, if you need world building and like explained magical systems, then this book isn't for you.
I mean, I don't need it to be like explained. Like I don't need to know how the magic comes to be. But I would like to have known how he did the magic, like what kind of movements he made, the things that he said. But I can also see that you're like, I don't care about those things. Boring, like move on.
Well, in my head, he just sort of does it internally. So it's nothing is visual. Like you can't see him doing it. He's just doing it inside his head, which is why I think, because magic is linked to madness in this book.
Yes.
About madness. That's why I think it's internal. Personally, like I think with the way you're like constructing the world in your head. I think there was a lot in this
that's clever.
What's internal. And like there's a lot of madness in this book, or like being on the edge of madness, like the king, famously King George III was.
Oh yeah, I love that bit.
And he is in this book as well. And later on, spoilery, Johnathan Strange gets himself into some madness as well. And that's why, for me, it felt like it was all sort of internal, but also so this book feels like it is set in Regency era, but it also has a lot of older stuff and mythology and like fairy tale elements to it. There's a lot of it that feels like it is linked to that, and a lot of, because there are fairies that they conjure and all that, like it's fairy magic. Fairy magic doesn't have actions and words. Fairy magic is just appears. That's kind of the vibe that I got from it, that it was like English magic which is what this book is about. Like,
Yeah.
I haven't explained it at all. There is English magic in this book. Comes from the Raven King, John Usclas, who was the king of the north of England in like the medieval times, kind of Viking to like Norman kind of time. So he was a Norman, wasn't he? Kind of, yeah. There's kind of Viking vibes and like Norman vibes and like medieval, basically. And he brings magic to England. And I thought that he was a really interesting character, actually, because he's more talked about than appears in the book. But it was interesting the way that he was like, such a strong mythical character, but was only human at the same time, which I found really like an interesting way of doing it, because it's not like there were fairies and then they upset the fairies and that's why magic left England as a part of this book. It was like this bloke, and that's never really explained either. I can understand. I think a lot of people who like a plot that wraps up and like makes sense wouldn't enjoy this book, because I feel like it is very vibes based.
I mean, I think you have to accept that Susannah Clarke, at her core, is a literary fiction author, and that is what you're going to get. It's the same with Piranesi. Have you read that one?
I haven't, no.
Oh, it's a very different book, but it's also, you don't get all the answers. It's very vague and also vibes. I mean, I preferred Piranesi over this one because of different elements. But yeah, I think that is something you need to remember when you start reading these books, and then you also need to accept certain things that will and will not be revealed in a plot. And I think with, what was his name again? John? Gosh. Yes.
Yeah.
That he is mentioned like by the characters, but he's explained in the footnotes. And usually I find footnotes so tedious, but I was listening to the audiobook along. So he was reading the footnotes aloud. So I would just not read them with my eyeballs, but just wait for the narrator to explain the footnotes to me. And we got to know so much about him in the footnotes. And there was a footnote very early on saying this was written in a text that Johnathan Strange and Mr. Norrell wrote together. And that was before we got to know Mr. Strange. And that kind of reveals where we end up.
Yeah.
And I love how footnotes are used by this. And that's another question. I thought maybe you know this. Who wrote this book? And who's the narrator?
Within the book, who wrote the book? Because as you were saying, there's loads of footnotes. Sometimes there's footnotes that are like pages long, and apparently I can't find any footnotes now. Just looking through it.
There was one who was 2 pages long. Yeah. That was insane. But I have one that is quite long.
There you go.
I think right here.
Of the page, yeah.
Yeah.
So there is a narrative voice, and also sometimes the like person who's writing it speaks to us directly.
Yeah.
Which I think is what also made it feel like a Victorian novel to me, because that happens all the time. Like it happened in War and Peace, where Tolstoy just starts talking about battle lines and stuff. And it happens in Middlemarch. Like it happens a lot in a Victorian novel where they just sort of start expanding to you about philosophical ideas for no reason.
Yeah.
But in this one, she talks to us and she's like, I think it's definitely a woman, because she often makes the narrator often makes asides about like, well, they didn't consider women at this point, but obviously like the women like they didn't talk to anyone. But like there's a lot of asides like that. But I don't know. I think considering the footnotes and everything, this is clearly supposed to be written after it's happened.
Yes.
And I wonder if it is supposed to be like a Victorian person writing about that time period, because that style feels so specific to me. Like Wuthering Heights and Vanity Fair, and there are a group of writers who do that, and I wonder if that's what it's like supposed to feel like in a way.
I feel like maybe it's a history book written from like someone like 50 years later, something like that, like you said. Because why else would all the details in the footnotes be there? Because some don't really like add a lot to the plot or the story, just give us some background information. And I cannot imagine it being in anything else than a history book.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. Last year I read Babel for this, for the Big Book Club.
Similar, yes.
A lot of the same like footnotes, and it is also a vibes-based historical fantasy kind of situation. Although I would say I definitely preferred this quite a lot.
Oh, I'm the other way around.
Really?
I prefer the characters in the book because they were so vivid and so different from each other.
See, I thought they were
Where
just stereotypes, like not very deep.
oh no, no, I didn't read it that way. I didn't feel like that to me. And here I felt like the characters were a bit too similar. So I found it more engaging to read Babel, and it definitely had more plot as well. But I do think this is more. It's a better book, like objectively.
Yeah, I think you can tell that it has more skill in terms of the writing. Like,
Yeah.
if
Mm-hmm.
you're just judging it based on the writing, I'd say most people would say that this was better. But if you prefer plot or character, then that's going to be a different choice.
Yeah, it's whether you rate it on enjoyment or on like more what you think writing is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely think if you don't read big books, like don't try it. Don't. This is not one to get into. Whereas Babel, I think if you don't read big books, you could maybe like it's a lot more.
I didn't even notice that it was that big.
Yeah.
I listened to the audiobook and it felt just like an ordinary book to me. But yeah, I mean, in the first half of this book, it reminded me of Babel, but later on it was too different because this keeps in the same vibe of the academics and of the literary. And I felt like Babel went away with the plot.
And I
It
also
became
think
very plot-based.
this is like both books comment on race and class and gender in this time period and in academics. Both of them, because the magicians, as you said at the beginning, are mostly academic magicians, and there's a lot of like research and dusty old libraries and sort of gatekeeping knowledge. And Mr. Norrell is a gatekeeper, whereas Johnathan Strange is more like open and wanting people to come into magic. And so both of them discuss those things. I think that Babel is a little more heavy-handed, and this is a little more like wry and sarcastic, like in terms of the way that they are talking about those things. This is more like winking and nodding at them, whereas Babel is more like in your face with them.
I mean, I would choose different wording. I would say that I found Babel braver, in the sense that I feel like Babel actually did it, as in that they really also explored the characters that weren't white men. And I think this is a little bit more just sprinkling than really because it's not the core of the book. Although I think then Stephen. Yeah, I just wanted to say Stephen is a different story. Yeah. I loved him. He had such an interesting storyline.
Yeah. I think that the way that he has to deal with the fairy, who I don't think is ever named in the book, the man with the down hair.
What I loved is that every white academic calls him the man with the thistle down hair, and Stephen calls him the gentleman.
Yeah. Yeah.
That says a lot.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking, was that the way that he has to deal with that is like, it makes you think about the way that he has to deal with the rich white men who he is the servant for throughout his whole life. Like the way that we see the thought process as he is like, how do I placate this man to stop him from doing like hurting other people and doing insane things, and like how do I manipulate him basically. But also I have no power in this situation, and I am completely like at his will. I have to do as much as I can, but I can't do much. I think it's the way that it's kind of a representation of what it must be like to have been a black man in that period, or to think about like not code switching, but just the manipulation and the way he has to protect himself. But he also is clearly a very kind person who wants to like protect other people. I also love it when he's, for fuck's sake, why is magic happening again? Can it just fucking stop? That's my favorite bit.
I think their relationship was really cleverly done, because I felt like it was also a comment on white saviorism, because the fairy is like, oh, I want to help you, I want to make you king. But in that, the fairy became incredibly pushy, didn't consider what Stephen actually wanted, constantly crossed his boundaries. So in that respect, I found this book very clever. But yeah, I found Stephen, he's like, if you have a big cast of characters, there's always one character with whom nothing is seriously wrong. And I feel like Stephen was that for this book.
Yeah.
Because, did I start hating Mr. Norrell? And eventually Johnathan as well. But, Mr. Norrell.
He's not, I don't think you're supposed to like him ever. I think he's supposed to be a terrible person from the beginning. Like, maybe you're supposed to be like a bit like impressed by him at the beginning and like, kind of like, he's this, he's not very sociable, but he is powerful and interesting and mysterious and whatever. And then by the end you're like, he is just a complete dick. Like, he just does not care for anyone who doesn't interest him. He is the most. But I thought the way that she discusses class, I thought was so interesting in this book, and something that was missing in Babel. I think like Babel does race a lot more, but it doesn't really deal with class very well. Whereas this book, I think the like Childermas character, and the way that you see how different people treat him, like whether that's Lascelles or Norrell or Strange or Drawlight, you see like the various sort of either paternalistic or patronizing ways that people treat him, and the ways that like Strange is the only one that realizes that this man is a magician who can do like powerful magic, and no one else is paying attention to him because he's like just a servant. No one should care.
I agree.
And I thought that was like there was a lot more subtle gradation of that. I don't know if that's because Susannah Clarke is actually English. Like, this is the thing we discussed in Babel, is that like an American trying to do the British class system is never going to quite grasp the subtleties of it. That's just like, that's about a different book.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't know that either, of course, because I'm not British, but
but I really enjoyed the way that she did that with class, and I really enjoyed as well the way she is it Augusta Strange? Is that Strange's wife?
Arabella,
that's the one.
Yeah.
She's like, there's like hints throughout that Strange is ignoring Arabella and something is going on with Arabella. And it's like, like women are just kind of ignored as if they didn't exist, as if they're just there for decoration, with both Arabella and Lady Pole. And then suddenly she dies, but she doesn't actually die. She gets replaced by a dead tree. It's very, very strange bit of magic, that. But yeah, the way that suddenly it kind of makes you realize that Strange isn't the good one, because in a way, like, Norrell is the kind of classic old academic who's like gatekeeping, old-fashioned, and not wanting to consider other perspectives, and like wanting to hoard everything for himself. And Strange is like the new go-getting action, like practical, like bring it all kind of adventurer. But then you see that he's like still so much in the ego, and like
oh dear, yes,
so much noticing the world around him, still completely absorbed and wanting to be like powerful. And then we see her at the edges, and we see her like get to know Lady Pole, and she knows the man with the thistledown hair before, and she talks to him, and Stranger's just like, oh, I must never have met him, and he's not interested, he's not listening to her. I found that was a powerful way to explore gender in this time period.
I also like how, especially like the fairy world and the fairy, how he and that world were kind of poking fun at the academics, and we're like, they are doing all these things, but that's not necessary to do magic. They think they have a grasp on it, but they know nothing, and they invite a black man and a woman into their world, and they are valued there. And that's definitely not laid on thick. I think it's like hints, especially in the later half. Yeah, I did like that about a book, because this could so have easily been a book where I'm like, okay, white middle-aged man, blah, blah, blah. But because there was like this voice behind the story that was kind of thinking that too, I never got really bored, because we're not supposed to take those men seriously.
Yeah, I think that's why I said it was more subtle, but I think it's just, it is, I think it's a book about like what's underneath a lot of the time. Like when they go to the fairy world, they go to I can't remember what they call it, but it's like a burrow. It's been hidden underground, like literally. They're in a like burial chamber, I think.
Oh, I don't remember the name.
They call it the Baron or the Burren or something, and they're all underground. And so it's like they've gone beneath. And then there's also like all these footnotes, which are obviously at the bottom of the page and much smaller, and they are kind of explaining what's going on to you, like they're explaining you the background and the history, that the men on the page are like, okay, what, like not focusing on. It's about what is missed by people who are in power, and like the things that they are ignoring, because that is off the page in a way, because it's underground, which I thought I really enjoyed about it. The constant references to it being underneath.
I didn't really think about it that way, but I really like that. Like that you look at the format of the way it's written as well as the story. I really like that idea. But also that it's actually kind of geniusly written, that you have a story within a story, that like we follow these men, but we also have another book, which is the footnotes that we're reading. Also, how did you feel about the illustrations?
I didn't really care about. I didn't really look at them very much, to be honest with you. Like I, like you, half read it and half listened to the audiobook, because I find this long, I have to listen to the audiobook or I'm never going to get through it.
Definitely, yeah, I did the same.
There is something Dickensian about them. Like they remind me of like Christmas Carol.
Exactly. That's why I got the Dickens vibes as well. Because I really like them, because again, I needed that visualization of just like, as you called it, the downstairs world. I needed like to be able to see that, but that's just me as a reader. I'm a very visual reader, so for me it helped. I would have liked one for every chapter.
I found I could see this book. I could imagine it quite clearly, but I don't know.
I'm jealous.
I mean, whenever I read, I can't see characters' faces. I've got no idea what anyone's face looks like. I've got like reading face blindness. Like they've all just got a whole face. But
I think that's helpful, because I think the authors are often the same way.
Yeah, but I can see the rooms and the like places that they are and like things like that. I definitely felt like I had a solid grasp on. This is kind of I felt like that worked for me. See what
I love that. For me, I always like, usually I make some actors in my head and I put like an height and and face and everything close, and I wasn't really able to do that in this book. Because Mr. Strange, Jonathan Strange, I was able to visualize, and his wife as well, but all the other people who were around them, all the other academics, like, you're all the same people to me, so that was a bit unfortunate for me.
I don't really remember any of the academics except for Mr. whoever the guy was who ended up being in charge of the like Lady Pole.
Oh, I liked him as well. He was very humble, and I think class was also an important part of his character.
Yeah. Well, he was well off as well, wasn't he?
I don't think so, because he went and got a job. I think he was middle class.
Do it without his patron or whatever.
Yeah, and it's a lot discussed, like, who does and does not like work. He liked work. He despised work. And like, oh my gosh, like these people.
What did you think about the fact it was set during the Napoleonic Wars? And last time we read War and Peace, which was also set during the Napoleonic Wars.
I had some trauma flashbacks for sure. When Johnathan Strange went to the front, I was like, not again, please, no. But no, I really enjoyed that part, again, because I think it was more visual, it was more plot driven, which I love literary fiction, but somehow I was looking for those things in this book. And I loved being with Johnathan Strange for a while and having such a singular story. It really worked for me. I don't know if it worked for the book, but it worked for me.
I skimmed over the bit that was literally in the battle where he was like, and now I was back inside with these people, and then I went over here, and then I went over there. It just doesn't do anything for me. But the bits where he was confusing, when the King of Spain got really annoyed because he rejigged all his like roads and like stuff like that.
That was really funny. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of humor in this book. It's definitely got quite a like satirical tone to it. I don't know if you could 100%. I guess it's kind of satirizing academics. The British class system of that time period in particular. But I think that it is quite humorous in tone, and that's what keeps it quite light. And I think what I like about it is that it has that tone, because I don't really like books that take themselves super seriously a lot of the
Oh
time.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and this book definitely was like, this is a silly book, but I'm having a good time in some
yeah.
part.
I think if this book had taken itself too seriously, especially with the academics and the magic, it would have been such a pill. I don't think it would have worked. So yeah, I agree on that. Are you watching the TV show, or have you watched it?
I haven't watched it yet. I might watch it. I don't know. Did you watch the whole thing?
No, it's not available in the Netherlands, so I just watched a few clips. But if I get my hands on it, I definitely want to watch it, because I feel like it will elevate my reading experience if I have a lot of visuals with certain parts. So yeah, I
Yeah,
would
I
love
think
to
it'll
watch
be
it.
interesting how they do it. I want to see who plays the characters.
Oh, Mr. Norrell is quite a famous actor, but I don't think Doctor Strange is.
Oh, right. That's yeah. So let's see.
It's quite an old series. I think it's almost 10 years old.
So Eddie Marsan as Mr. Norrell. Yeah, I recognize him.
Yeah.
Bertie Cavill. It looks like they're the same age, which is not how I imagined them.
No. In the clips, Strange clearly looks a few decades younger.
Okay, so they've obviously done a lot with makeup and stuff, because they look both like just middle-aged men now.
I mean, Mr. Norrell has a wig, and Jonathan Strange doesn't, which I feel like very visually distinguishes them. I kind of like that.
Yeah, it's actually the 20-year anniversary of this book being published.
Oh, really? Oh, I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
There's like a big special edition coming out.
Yeah, it's a folio one, right? With a lot of illustrations. I did see that Susannah Clarke is writing a short story or novella, or a little bit in between, from this world that comes out this year as well.
That's interesting.
She does have a short story collection also based in this world.
I didn't know that. Have to have a look. What did you think about how the book like changed so much halfway through? I feel like the first half, it felt really predictable, like where it was going. Like we were in the, like we were with Mr. Norrell, him trying to bring back English magic, and then Strange turns up and they like get together trying to work out, and then they get hired by the government, and it seems like they're obviously going on track to fall out because Mr. Norrell's a dick, but apart from that, fairly straightforward. And then all of a sudden, and then Lady Pole has also been taken to Fairy, and so obviously something's going to go down with that, and Stephen's constantly being whisked away. But I feel like it changed suddenly in the middle when Arabella died. When Arabella died and Strange went off to Italy, that was such an interesting thing to have included. It was not at all what I was expecting from the book.
Oh, no.
Because I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed being in Venice. I thought that was the perfect city to choose for a book like this. Like it's magical anyway, just because it's on canals. It's a weird place. And the whole tone of it changed, and Mr. Norrell's sort of Johnathan Strange's descent into his sort of obsession with magic, and he's becoming more determined and wanting to like break the rules and stuff because of his grief. And his friendship with Lord Byron, and the way that like affected him as a character.
I found that I loved it, because it took me 400 to 500 pages to get into this book. Okay. So because I felt like it didn't have a very strong drive. I mean, I get that it was surrounded on that question of finding magic again, but I didn't really feel the purpose of the book. And maybe I will on a reread. I had a hard time getting into it. And once we had those more direct purposes, like Jonathan's goal of like his grief and him getting through that, it worked for me. So I enjoyed this book way more in the second half. And I really liked the location changes as well, both Spain and Venice. And then we are in fairy world for a little while. And when we were in Stephen's world, I also really enjoyed that. So I enjoyed it, I think, when the book became a little bit more varied and a little bit more direct, I want to say. I enjoyed that. But I still don't really know how I feel about this book, because to me it feels like a 3.5, which
Okay.
is, I think, quite a low rating. I definitely expected to like it more. But yeah, this book just didn't do what I needed from a book like this.
I think I enjoyed it. I don't think it would be a new favorite. I think I was potentially expecting it to be like a book I was obsessed with. Was like, this is a great book and I'm favorite year kind of thing. Although, I haven't given any book 5 stars this year. I don't know if I'm just being stupid. I don't really know what's going on with me, but
That's sad.
but I did enjoy this book. I think it did such a good job of being in the style of the time period, which I really enjoyed.
Yes,
And I think I enjoyed the kind of satirical kind of nature of it and the characters as being super ridiculous because they are like, I don't know, like Austen characters, like Mr. Collins, or like that sort of vibe I get from a lot of these characters, or like Mr. Elton from Persuasion. There's like that kind of Sir Elton, sorry, he's Sir Elton. He'd be offended.
Oh, excuse me.
No, Eliot, Sir Eliot. That's what I mean. They get the vibe of those characters from this book, and I enjoyed that. I think I also enjoyed the way that it like starts off super in the time period, and not a lot of magic is happening because Mr. Norrell doesn't let anyone do practical magic, and then. As the book goes on, the magic kind of starts to like burst out. It's like the magic is inside the footnotes to begin with, and then the footnotes get longer and longer, and then all of a sudden the magic's like exploded out into the actual book, and it's like creeping around the edges. And the way that it played with like Arthurian legend and like the classic fairy tale setup as well. The way that we had like, I really enjoyed the prophecy being in it. And the character Vinculus, who gives the prophecy, who has like blue tattoos all over him. He's like a Celtic.
Oh yes.
So there's like that Celtic fairy, because I think these fairies are based more on like Irish and Scottish mythological fae than on like other fairies from other places. There is a lot of the kind of sort of violent whimsy where they're just like do whatever they want, and sometimes that means killing people, and sometimes that means having dance parties all night. Like there's just a I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I think I enjoyed the way that they play out, the way that the story played out towards the end. I think
me too.
Worked for me. How Stephen ends up to be king, because he's been told so many times he's going to be king, he has to be king. But we can't imagine them killing George III to make him King of England as husband.
No.
That would be quite an upheaval of the world. And the bit with Lascelles where him in Fairy, the boy on the bridge, I thought that was...
Wait, I'm not sure if I'm remembering the right scene. Is that when he kills him?
Yeah. And then
Stephen. Yeah.
And then no. He goes to the place where the boy is like, I am the guardian of the bridge, and there's all the hanged bodies around him, and he shoots the guardian. He's like, we have to fight, and then he becomes the guy who has to shoot people. Like he's trapped in Fairy forever now.
Why did I forget that?
I don't know. I enjoyed that, like the darkness and the fairy and the like magic becoming more explicit.
Yes, me too.
Yeah.
I would have liked to see that throughout the book, but I know that's not what the book is doing. I think maybe if I watch the series, because I want to like this book more than I did, and I feel like it has the potential to. But I've also my brain is a little bit in scatters the last few weeks. So I think maybe part of that is the reason why I just didn't connect in the beginning. And then when you don't have that base, it's really hard to pick up the book like mentally later. So maybe I will enjoy it more on the reread, because everything you're saying, I was like, yes, that was great. That was great. I love that. But still didn't fully work for me.
I do also wonder how this, as someone who's not English, or how this book works, because you've read a lot of English classics, so maybe it would be easier for you. But I feel like there is so much like English history and like English folklore in this book. It's very like it's about English magic is what they talk about all the time, English magic. And there's a lot in it about like there's a lot in it that's like references to like the Norman invasion or like Celtic mythology or like the Viking Dane what do they call it? The Dane law, when the Vikings had the north of England. Like I think there was a lot of
I think that question is maybe better towards someone who lives far away from England, because I live in the Netherlands. So a lot of my education is, and British history is very dominant. Like
really
the Brit, of course, they like we're speaking English right now. That is like an example of how dominant British is. So I know more about British history than French or German history. So I think like I got a lot of it, but I'm sure there were some details that I don't know because I'm not British. But I didn't feel like Susannah Clarke was writing this for only a British audience.
No.
I think anyone. I mean, it's translated also in a lot of languages, so I didn't necessarily feel like that was the thing that was holding me back. But I'm sure that I missed a few things that you were taught like in high school or middle school.
Yeah, that's not. I don't think that she's writing just for an English audience. I just mean, I don't know. There's a lot in it that felt super English, like history. But I'm surprised that you learn so much English history because we don't learn anything outside of the UK in our history.
I mean, I don't mean to be mean, but then it's very British American to only focus on your own country. And I mean, I graduated. One of my graduating topics was the Vietnam War. Like super random, but it's American history. It has nothing to do with the Netherlands.
I did the Russian Revolution in my graduating topic, so I guess that's nothing to England. So I didn't do that. Yeah. I guess I just mean when you're younger, it's just like the Tudors and World War II.
Oh yeah, I mean a lot of Dutch and English history is connected because I think this was after Henry something and all his dead wives. But I think there was like a Dutch prince who married an English princess. Yes. And that is kind of when the royalty started in the Netherlands. So we get that a lot. I think that was the other graduating topic I had, like English and Dutch royals. But of course I forgot all about that.
It's funny because I don't think that most people in the UK know that William of Orange was Dutch.
I mean, he was German technically, but
was he?
Yeah,
he was a Dutch prince, wasn't he? Like something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, but they were all from German descent. I just never say that to a Dutch person, but it's true.
Yeah. Harry said that in America they do a lot of American history. Yeah, that's. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to learn as well.
It's not true of everywhere. There's a lot of history everywhere.
I try to be nice.
So is there anything else you wanted to add? Any other comments you had about this book?
I feel like all the points you sent me in the end we discussed, right?
Yeah, I think we've covered everything.
Yeah. No, I didn't really know what I wanted to say about this book, and you said it all, I think. Yeah. I mean, I would love to know what other books you're going to read with the Big Book Club.
I don't actually have any for the rest of this year at the moment. I've kind of. I was going to read the Lacuna, but I haven't found anyone to read it with at the moment, so I don't have any plans for the rest of the year so far. Maybe I will suddenly surprise come up. But yeah, at the moment I'm actually like really busy in my real life. So
maybe more of a time for novellas.
Yeah, exactly. I've read so many fewer books this year than any other year.
Oh, same. Wow. Yeah.
I've read, I think, 40 books so far this year, which, considering the last 4 years, I've read more than 100 every year. I'm definitely not anywhere near 100 this year.
I mean, I'm the same. I'm not reading a lot. It was like a struggle to fit this in. And as you know, we had to delay because of me, because I wasn't reading fast enough. Everything is really so slow.
Yeah. So this is the last the last big book club for the year, I think. Maybe I will let you know at some point if there's another one, but I think this will be the last one. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, Milena, as well, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And I hope you can learn to like this book more than you did on first reading.
I did not hate it, and I liked it more than War and Peace, which is something.
Which is something.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again soon. Bye.
Bye.